Right. So, hi everyone. My name is Neil Ryder. I'm going to be hosting this session and the following session. And before we start, I'll just mention a few things. I'm sure you've heard them a few times already, but can you just make sure if you're in the audience that your microphone is muted? And if you have any questions, just please post them in the chat box during the presentation, and then I'll be able to monitor that and I'll ask our presenters your questions when they're finished presenting. And I should just remind everyone that this is going to be recorded and then it'll be uploaded. It'll be available for any conference participants to watch afterwards. So the title of the next presentation is English Impact Implemented Across the Region, Collecting Internationally Comparable Information about Teenagers' English Language Capability to Inform State Education Policy. And our two speakers today are Simon Etherton and Karen Dunn. Simon Etherton is the British Council Future English Program Director and is currently based in Ukraine. He has been engaged in teaching and teacher education for over 30 years in contexts as diverse as Ukraine, Central Asia, South Caucasus, India, Oman, Europe, and the South Pacific. Professional and research interests include teacher knowledge, practitioner research, and initial literacy development. And we also have Dr. Karen Dunn here. She's been a member of the British Council's Assessment Research Group since 2016. She's based in London, where she works as a senior researcher specializing in measurement and evaluation. Karen works closely with Aptis test data, carrying out work evaluating the functioning of new and established tests across the Aptis suite. She also contributes to a range of British Council research projects with a language testing focus, such as English Impact and Vocabulary Research Study. So if our presenters are ready to start, I'll just hand things over now. Thank you.
Right. Okay, hello there. So I'm going to start up. Now, as you've gathered from that very lovely introduction there, so I am on the kind of more research academic side of it, and Simon is very much kind of more on the ground, and we're going to split this talk in that way. So we're talking today, oh, just a second. Yep. We're talking today about the English Impact Project. And now the first thing to emphasize is that English Impact is an initiative that has very much grown up in the eyes of the New Directions audience. So right from inception. So some of the audience members here may have heard about it before, sort of over the past kind of 5 years or so. Now we're really taking the opportunity today to overview the project and to review some of the recent developments and also outline some of the kind of current relevance and and find out really what's happening now. So over the years, English Impact, it's become a project that kind of provides representative insights into teenage learners' English proficiency, their motivation levels, and also within social and educational contexts. So as well as being kind of individually insightful about a country context or regional context, it's also providing kind of like solid data that is internationally comparable. So just in terms of the timelines here, you've maybe first heard about English Impact at New Directions during its inception stage. And this was really where people were just kind of like the project team were looking to provide a means of kind of, or a system of evaluating English language ability and engagement using robust testing methodology, really. But the ideas here were still very kind of broad and very all-encompassing. But then sort of as the project moved forwards, really what happened was that they kind of like refined the approach, the development of the practicalities. Partnership organizations were kind of like reached out to, which I'm going to talk a little bit more in a moment. And actually the kind of the nitty gritty was really kind of being boiled down to achievable goals and kind of looking at the sampling and the operational side of things, which actually this talk in 2017 was looking at the kind of like the innovation and the technological side of rollout, which actually used tablet delivery for all of the testing and the surveys. Then last year, I actually spoke with a colleague from the University of Bath, looking actually just at kind of like a segment of interest in this kind of amazingly rich data set that had grown out of the initial stages of the project. And as I say, there was like kind of really, as well as the value for the ministries of the countries that were involved, there's also this broader academic interest, which we're going to kind of talk about a little bit more in a while. And then some of you may have even been at the talk yesterday, where Barry and colleagues were talking about the current use of the English Impact Project in Taiwan, which is actually going ahead at the moment. And this is actually kind of like really emphasizing the use of English in terms of kind of local interventional policy. And I think Barry emphasized that it was part of a kind of a comprehensive learning system within Taiwan. And then, of course, there's this presentation, and really we're looking at the rollout over a whole region, and Simon's going to talk a little bit more about that in in the kind of like the wider Europe British Council region. So I think that the key thing to kind of take hold of is just the fact that this project like basically results in robust data both at a country level and also at an international level. So the next section, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the kind of like the inspiration and the development stage, because it's very important. This is the time where the project team were kind of garnering and sharing expertise, both internally within the British Council, but also externally, where they looked around after the initial pilot study, which was very broad-based. There were 24 countries involved, and there was kind of like, it was basically seeing what could be done. But actually they partnered with ACER, the Australian Council for Educational Research, who have a very solid background and experience with international survey data collection. So we're talking here the kind of the PISA survey, Tim's looking at maths, Pearl's looking at reading ability. And so what ACER were able to bring was a kind of a sophisticated statistical expertise, as well as a practical insight that, you know, because they've been involved in projects where you sampled from a whole country or from a whole region to find out what levels of kind of academic ability were. We also worked with the University of Bath, and they made a strong contribution to the development of the motivation survey particularly, but also the colleague in Bath has a strong experience of kind of survey development and survey data collection, which is actually kind of really important in this kind of project. So moving through the timeline, I mean, it really was a kind of a refinement of the methodology. And another thing to emphasize is the value that was brought in the internal kind of collaboration, because across kind of British Council departments, we had like the more kind of, as I say, the research team were working very closely with the teams on the ground. And it was a kind of two-way kind of benefit, where the teams on the ground were developing assessment literacy because they were involved in the kind of rollout of this project, which was very time-bound and very specific. But the researchers were also learning about, you know, the operational side of test delivery and all of the practical decisions that had to be made. So by 2017, the study had been piloted successfully in 4 different countries, and 3 of the reports have been made public and are available still on the website. And it basically showed that the English Impact Project could be successfully carried out. And I guess what happened was, like, the team found out that there, you know, the wide-ranging value of it. So, for example, in Madrid, there was very much the kind of like a lot of comments about the fact that the data was able to kind of disprove some of the more kind of anecdotal assumptions that had been made about the role of kind of like social status and engagement with the bilingual education program. And so what the project did was to actually show that actually there weren't the differences that people were kind of just felt were there. And it was actually using kind of solid empirical data to show this. And I guess in a way, this kind of fits with the context of the plenary talk yesterday, talking about evidence-based decision making. It wasn't, so the English impact data was able to be used to kind of step back and say, okay, so this is how students in the classroom are actually experiencing it right now. So yeah, moving on to kind of like moving forward a bit, I just kind of want to talk about how the data that was collected in 2017 really was like, it was a proof of concept. So I talk about the 2015 pilot, the 2017 study, as I say, provided like a real proof of concept. This could go ahead, it could go ahead on the scale that was envisaged, and kind of actually demonstrated that English impact can provide this valid, reliable and comparable baseline of levels of English language and also attitudes towards it. So it's kind of the data that's collected is informative on multiple levels. So we've got the language proficiency, but we've also got the attitudes and the social dimension, which means that we've got here more than just test data. Now, just the final bit that I'm going to talk to is the central value of the sampling to this study, because in order to get representative data, it's very, very important that the sampling approach is tight, watertight, it's robust, and it means that we can actually, as I said, we can rely on the data to represent the students that are in the classrooms right now. And so the approach that's taken basically kind of defines the population. So this is kind of like, technically it's known as a comparison unit, and usually it's a kind of like autonomous region. So we had two city samples, we had Madrid and Bogota, and in the 2017 data there were also country-wide samples, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. And what happens is so there's a random selection of schools within that. So if you look at the diagram on the right here, and then from those schools, there are students that are randomly selected within that. And as well as the ones that are going to take part, there's also a kind of waiting list of students. So if somebody doesn't turn up, it's still randomized. And now the other important thing to note is this kind of idea of implicit stratification. And this is where the project team really works with the ministries of education within each country. It's like it's a very close relationship to achieve the success of this project. And by implicit stratifications, we're just meaning kind of making sure that the difference of rural, the urban kind of differences are represented, different regions, maybe different school types. And just sort of as an adjunct to this, there is the availability for explicit stratification, which is where you might take something that's relevant. For example, in Spain, where they had the bilingual, non-bilingual schooling system, there's only a few bilingual schools within the region at the time, but they wanted to be able to make a statistical comparison between these schools and the other schools. So they were able to oversample using this explicit stratification method. So I guess that the key point to emphasize here is the flexibility to meet the needs of the region, which again kind of fits back with what Barry was talking about yesterday with respect to Taiwan. It's the context of use is, it kind of permeates through the project. So we get this kind of the data that represents kind of the country, but then is also comparable on an international basis. So this is where I'm going to hand over to Simon, and he's just going to talk a little bit more about the kind of like the rollout of this at a regional level in his area. Okay, thank you very much. I'll move on.
Thanks, Karen, and hello, everyone. So yes, I mean, Karen's given a really nice sort of background to the development of English impact in the British Council, but also a sense of what it is for those people who maybe didn't manage to join those previous presentations in New Directions Conference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we decided in our region to adopt English Impact and why we decided to adopt it. First of all, our region, we British Council calls it wider Europe, and I think we're the only people to call this part of the world wider Europe. But by wider Europe, we mean the part of Europe that stretches from Central Asia through Russia, down through Ukraine, the Western Balkans, Turkey, South Caucasus, and Israel as well. So it's a very diverse region. It's not all, but a lot of it is part of the old Soviet Union, and has a shared historical educational context in terms of that background. Where we're at in the region is that a lot of the governments and ministries are, after the 1992 breakup of the early 90s breakup of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of move to engage. There was a lot of economic reform, but we're really at a place now where the governments are pushing for major education reform, and British Council is very pleased that we're partnering a lot of the governments across the region in this education reform, especially around English language teaching and learning. So for this project, 5 countries in the region were selected to be part of this initiative, and mainly because of the interest and engagement with the ministries of education in these countries. So across the South Caucasus, there's Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. There's Ukraine, and there's also Uzbekistan from Central Asia. The idea was also that we would get a spread of data from across our region, from Central Asia through Ukraine down to the South Caucasus. And I think the key thing to mention here is that the ministries were absolutely supportive of adopting this English Impact research, and we had a huge amount of cooperation from the ministries. It is a lengthy process that we go through with ACER to develop the sample, the representative sample of schools, and decide, what are we including in the research and what aren't we including in the research. And for all of these country research initiatives, we're focusing on government schools, government secondary schools, and we are testing children in grade 10. So these are 16-year-old children. The reason why the governments are so interested is because they really don't have valid, reliable data on their education systems, particularly in English language teaching and learning in the schools, but also the proficiency levels of their children. So there was a great interest in actually undertaking this research and getting that sort of hard data that would enable them to make the sort of decisions that they need to make around policy, around education system change, teacher development, etc. So that's really the sort of background to the region, the countries that that are involved in the initiative, and also the sort of reasons why we had them involved. In addition to English Impact looks at students' proficiency through English language testing of the sample of children, but it also looks at student motivation, as Karen said, and gives us a very good sense of the students' social context, but also their attitudes and their motivation to English language learning. But for our study, we wanted more than that. We wanted a much better understanding of what was actually happening in schools and classrooms in these countries. So we worked with the University of Leicester to conduct a needs analysis research project, really looking at creating a sort of situational or contextual understanding of these countries. You know, what is the impact of the assessment systems, the pre-service and in-service training of teachers, teachers' proficiency levels, the practices in the classroom, sort of attitudes of parents, administration, school leaders, that whole sort of wraparound information that helps governments to make the decisions that they need to make. So we embarked on this research just under a year ago, and we were in the middle of testing in Uzbekistan and Ukraine. We managed to complete a third of quite substantial testing in remote regions, but unfortunately, with the COVID situation in February, schools just suddenly closed, and we had to suspend our testing program. We had hoped that we would be able to start the English impact testing again in this new academic year, but the situation across our region is so difficult at the moment. Most schools are actually still shut. Remote teaching is the norm, that it hasn't been possible yet to start up the English impact testing, which is unfortunate. However, we are planning on doing it in the spring, God willing, but the other part of it is we did manage to complete the University of Leicester research. So maybe if we quickly move on to the next slide, I'm looking at the time. So in terms of what have we learned so far? I think there's two really important aspects of this research from the government's perspective. The first is that this data can help them to make educated decisions, properly informed decisions about their reform and policy, etc. When I was discussing with the Deputy Minister and the Minister of Education in Ukraine about this research, they were saying that it's so important to actually have this data to persuade stakeholders throughout the education system about the reform agenda, because a lot of people don't think there's a problem. For example, they don't see why things need to change. And I think the data provides the government with that ability to share that with the population, with key stakeholders, heads of schools, etc., and say, this is why we're doing the reform initiative. And I think the other key aspect that governments are really interested in is once they make the decisions around system change and you know, they change some of the policies, or they adopt their reform agenda. They want to know how effective that is. What is the impact of that? And one of the great things about this research is it's a baseline. And ministers in education have said to me, this is great because, you know, in 5 years' time, we can do this again. And in 10 years' time, when the children who are currently, you know, in grade 1 with our new, you know, reform agenda get to grade 10, we'll be able to see, really, has this made a big difference? And I think for them, it's not just about overall proficiency as well. It's about understanding in a lot more detail about specific skill areas. So, for example, there might be a greater influence on helping children to develop their oral fluency. And, you know, the testing can actually tell us specifically whether there has been a change in that particular area or not, or, you know, to do with attitudes over time as well towards English language learning. A lot of the way that we teach in the classroom with the reforms, the changes in the way children are learning English means that they might become more motivated to learn English. They might enjoy their classes a little bit more. So I think that's really the key part of the discussion there. And I think if we just move to the final slide. Yes, I think the final point to make here is that the data is really useful and important for governments, but it's also important for us and for the UK ELT sector, because it helps us to work with governments to where we can support their strategic priorities, the things that they feel they want to work on. And it helps us to make those decisions and provide that partnership and support. But the data forms part of a much larger data set. So every time we do one of these English impacts, it adds to our knowledge and understanding of English language proficiencies and learning across different contexts, different areas, with different variables and at different time. And because of the nature of the data, it's very comparable. So for researchers, this is a vast pool of rich data that they can look at, very specific bits of it across different kinds of contexts, doing comparisons and so on. And we feel that as we continue to conduct English Impact, it will add to this data source. I think that's our time, isn't it, Neil?
Yeah, I was just going to step in there in a second. So yeah, I'm just right. I just want to see if there's any questions from the audience in the chat. And while I'm waiting for that, I was going to ask you, if we've still got 5 minutes left, if you could describe any of the specific problems you observed when you were looking at, when you're doing the needs analysis of the region. You're saying, like, what things in particular really needed to be reformed?
Yeah, I think the pre-service training of teachers is one of the biggest issues in our region. Because of the system of training teachers through universities and the pedagogical universities. There's a great emphasis on language and understanding language, English language, and very little around methodology and pedagogy. And that's studied separately. And the amount of teaching practice that's available for pre-service teachers is very, very small. So that's something that's been a big, and also in-service support for teachers and teacher development as well. It's very much in our region, it's very much tied up with a 5-year, what they call an attestation process, where teachers can are assessed after 5 years and then can be promoted. But that sense of continuing professional development is another area that the data has shown really needs a lot more support across the region. And there are lots of very specific issues to do with each of the countries that we work in, which are also very important and interesting for those countries.
And also another question about student motivation in this region. Is this something that's is an issue for teachers? That students are required to study English, but they don't particularly want to, or are the students quite motivated to learn English? Do they see it as useful?
Yes, as I alluded to earlier, I think that the English has been taught in a specific way that has been very academic. And not really about using English, but more about knowing English and being tested on your knowledge of English rather than your ability to use English. And I think that's that inevitably has an impact on students' motivation. Some children, they're okay with that because they enjoy linguistics and so on. But for a lot of children who would normally be very good at language learning, if they were using language, actually don't enjoy those kind of classes. So I think the implications for methodology in the classroom is really big as well.
I think the value of actually having this motivation study that was developed by Janina Ivanets at the University of Bath is that it takes in all different facets. Motivation isn't just a single kind of, are you motivated to learn English? It's got like kind of 8 different traits, and there's this kind of idea of, okay, so what is it that underlies their drive to learn English? How, are they looking out and seeing that knowing English could be kind of functionally useful? Is it of personal value? And that kind of thing could really give additional information. It's like, how do we capture their interest? So like Simon says, if you're going to kind of be moving forward and looking at how English is going to be kind of approached in the classroom, then this is where you can get some data about what's going to work with the students and what it is that kind of piques their interest and how it is like kind of received by them. I mean, and we're talking teenagers, so they, I mean, particularly in Spain, they were very happy to answer very honestly on all fronts. So yeah, no.
One question from the audience here has come in. So someone is asking, were there challenging situations that you experienced when it comes to reception of the English Impact Project by other stakeholders, like other research institutions or local experts? And if so, how did you deal with these issues?
Well, Karen might be able to talk about the previous iterations of English Impact, but in our region, we really haven't had any real resistance to the research process, whether it's the University of Leicester situational analysis, needs analysis, or the English Impact as well. We've had absolute full cooperation from the ministries. And I suppose because of the nature of the systems here, it's very much top down. So when the ministries tell schools, you know, you will cooperate, they tend to cooperate very well. And we've had, but in terms of the English Impact data collection, we are in direct contact with the schools. Our exams teams set up the meetings, set up the whole testing situation, and we've had absolute full cooperation from schools. And there's a greater sense of, I mean, they want the results for themselves, their schools, and so on. And I think that's something. Karen, you wanted to say something.
No. It's I actually, so what, I kind of came into the project more at the data analysis stage, so I wasn't really kind of involved in that kind of like hands-on approach. But I think the actual the 2017 project, I mean, it was basically, like I said, a proof of concept, and it was working with ministries that were, Simon says, very keen to kind of be involved. And you know, I think the key to the success is to have that communication, because in order to be able to kind of sample and to carry it out and to meet the strict kind of sampling criteria, you have to have the kind of the buy-in, as it were, across the country. So I guess, you know, that's a really important hurdle. If you don't have that, it wouldn't be achieved. But I think the intrinsic value of what comes out of the projects, it's quite easy to see, and now that we actually have shown that it works, then
yeah. And I think just to add to that, partnering with ACER, it really helps as well, because you know they have a great track record with, everyone knows about PISA and TIMSS and FALS and so on. So as soon as we mention that this is a partnership between British Council with our reputation and ACER with their reputation, there isn't really any great need to persuade anyone about the research itself or the validity of the research.
All right, well, thank you very much. I just see the time is a little bit over here, so we better wrap it up now. So thank you to both Karen and Simon for showing up today and for the very interesting presentation. Just gonna have a very short break, and at 4 o'clock, the next presentation in this room is going to be titled Document Co-Citation Analysis of the Translation and Interpreting Research, Implications for Assessment and Pedagogy. This is with Vahid Aryadost and Zhu Shui Lian. So that'll start at 4 o'clock. And yes, so thanks again to our speakers, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.